All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Achayo. It's July 15th, 2024, and we're at Cramoisi in Dundee. And thank you so much to Ryan and Sophia for letting us use their space for this interview today.
Yeah.
And Elise, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
First question, why wine?
Oh my gosh, you're just gonna start with the biggest question.
Exactly.
That takes a little bit of unearthing, but why wine? Why not? Why be a doctor? Why be a lawyer? I chose wine really as it was a pivot when I was younger. I think maybe when I was like 24, I had trained as a bread baker. I was an apprentice as a bread baker, and then fell in love with bread and was baking for a couple of years, but started feeling my body just really getting tired. Waking up at 2 a.m. is a lot on your body. And so wine became the thing I pivoted into because I had a little intro to wine at university. I took an elective course that was like 75% on wine. It was called International Beverage Management. And I really liked it. And then with my study abroad program in Northern Italy, I got to really experience wine as part of the culture. And I think that was my true introduction to wine and witnessing it be part of a culture. And I think even now I think about how that really laid the foundation for how I interact with wine, and have always wanted people to interact with wine. So fast forward to me graduating and leaving, I found myself on a farm. I have a hospitality degree and a dual major in sustainable agriculture and food production. I wanted nothing to do with hospitality. So when I saw a job post or an apprenticeship post for a bread baker and a farm apprentice, bread apprentice and a farm apprentice, I went with that. There's a little bit of a background story as to why that bread, but let me just continue this part. But yeah, so I took up bread baking, really fell in love with it, and then, like I said, a few years later, found myself really tired and just thought, okay, what can I pivot into as a way to take a break, give myself a break? And at that time, I didn't really have like a long career. Like I just graduated college not too long ago. So there wasn't much for me to like jump back into or to say, oh, well, I have experience in doing this, let me go do that. So it was both a stressful moment, but also felt like I just had a clean slate. I can start something new and build from there. And so, yeah, I pivoted into wine, remembering that I really enjoyed that elective course and remembering my time experiencing wine in Italy, and just was like, yeah, I think that won't be a waste of time pivoting into that. And then we'll come back to bread when I feel rested. 9 years later, I am here. So I just continued with wine. I love learning, and I think food and wine, really one and the same, has always been something that I've had interest in. And I think part of why when I started my dual major, which is more about sustainable agriculture and really getting more down to like the human level, so like farming and people and land and history and culture, that was really where I found myself grounded. And so that's kind of the path that I've followed with wine, is now I feel like being here, I've found that grounding again, because I'm much closer to where wine comes from.
Very close.
Yeah, which I feel so much better about. But when I started out in wine, it was that pivot, and I started out working in a wine shop and really loved the initial part of it, of just learning. Like I knew as much as what I learned in my wine class and trying to put that together with my experience in Italy. But because I hadn't thought that was a career path, I didn't like try to make it a thing, right? It was like, oh, I took the class, really loved it. And I remember actually emailing my professor while I was in Italy. I'd taken the wine class the year before, and so I'm in Italy, and I'm like, I love this, I want to learn more, but we didn't have any other courses on wine. And so I emailed him and asked if I could be his TA for the class, Because like in my mind, I thought if I could just grade students' work, like I would absorb more information. And so I did that. And then I kind of wish that somebody had said, hey, it looks like you really like an advisor would have sort of said that, you know, it looks like you like wine and da-da-da. Have you thought about XYZ positions in the wine industry? But that didn't happen. And so without that guidance, I kind of just continued with, which no regrets, but I think that maybe I would have gotten into the wine industry a little bit sooner. But again, timing is everything. So, but yeah, so by the time that I got into it, it was just learning so much. And I was really excited about that. So for about a year and a half, I worked at a wine shop. And they had hired me knowing that, like I told them, I was like, listen, like I took this class. I was in Italy in a major wine region. I was in Piedmont. And so I just said, I really want to learn. And I smile a lot during my interview, and it worked. They're like, we can work with that. And so, yeah, they hired me and paid for my WSAT level 3. They wouldn't pay 1 and 2. They were like, you can do that. We're not wasting our money on that. And I was like, well, I'm not paying for that. So I just jumped into 3. And so, yeah, in continuing to learn, I felt like being in that wine shop, there was no upward mobility. And so it was, how do I continue to go in this direction? And I happened to have a friend who worked for a distributor. And he was like, give me a resume and I will give it to my boss, and he did. My resume landed in front of the VP of the division of a bigger company. But and then not too long, I was interviewing with the VP of that company, and that's how I moved into distribution. So I worked as a sales consultant for a distributor for like 4 years, and I think there is when I really started to notice what I call a disconnect with the experience I had with wine, especially in Italy, and how I envision wanting people to engage with it, and how I was actually seeing how people engage or didn't engage with wine. And to me, felt very much like one of the barriers was around the language of wine. And so people would say to me like, oh, I don't know how to describe this the right way, or I'm not gonna say like the right things, and it just took away from them truly experiencing wine from their own like perspective. And it bothered me, because I just thought, well, it's not this thing that there's a right way to do. Like, it's food, it's part of food. You get to consume it how it makes sense to you. And with wine, I think the beauty of it is that because it's such a sensory thing, that it really relies on your lived experience and your sensory memories that you're going to smell in that wine. And so I rather people say like, oh, this smells like my grandmother's kitchen. And then we can dig into that and say what specifically, like what kind of spices was she cooking? Were there herbs in the kitchen? Was she hanging garlic? Paint me a picture of that kitchen. I think that's a much more engaging and definitely a great way to get to know one another. And so I see wine and food as a great connector of people, regardless of backgrounds and generational differences and whatnot. And so to see that missing and to see that not be a way that we try to have people engage with wine was really disheartening for me. And then on top of that, I started to also feel like, in the beginning, with wine, because it was not my language, I didn't question it. Just like I've learned English, it's not my language, so I'm not. Now I do. Now I'm like, why do you guys say this? It doesn't make sense. I don't understand how this, But in the beginning, it's someone else's language, and so you just try to learn it as it is, and try to understand it and be able to kind of like flow with it. And so with wine, it was kind of the same thing, where I was learning the way that the wine language was spoken specifically here in the US. And when I finally started to feel that disconnect. It was like, wait, so it feels to me like wine here in the US is engaged with differently than where I had first got introduced to it. And there also seemed to be a sense of like disconnect from where wine comes from. There's like this gaping hole between like vineyards and wineries and then like the bottle pretty on the shelf or in a restaurant menu, on a restaurant menu. So I couldn't understand that. And so this disconnect of people, wine drinkers, everyday wine drinkers, not really having that sense of like, how's wine made? Where does it come from? Where does it grow? Do people grow it? Who, you know, like all these questions, not even being something people could ask, felt really weird to me. And so, so I learned the language as is and then started to feel like as I was understanding it and starting to put kind of like the dots together, I'm like, wait, like there are missing pieces here. And I don't think I like that there are these pieces missing. You know, so kind of like with English again, I know how to speak my thoughts into English, right? And it's the same thing with wine. It's like now, because I have the foundation of wine, I can speak how I experience it in a language that makes sense to me, still within the bigger language, if that makes sense. Yeah, and so, but when I got to that point where I was like, no, this is not it. Like there was just such disjointedness. I don't think that's a word, but it felt very...
It's a word.
It wasn't making sense to me. And I think I started to see where people were having that barrier. And for me, like I said, it was very much the language part. And being someone that, like English, this wine language is not my first language. I can kind of have like a bird's eye view of like looking at it and being like, okay, I can kind of see where we're missing the link here. And so, I started to essentially want to figure out how we can bring that back together and get more people to engage with wine and just get rid of that like perception of wine being elitist and it being unapproachable, inaccessible to so many people. Because at the end of the day, I feel like just like food really should be accessible to anyone who wants to have access to it. And then just viewing it also from my side of things, of not seeing my cuisine, my sensory reference point being relevant. Like it felt like if I continue to speak the wine language as I was being taught, that it dismissed me completely. How I experience wine, that wasn't relevant. How I describe wine, that wasn't relevant. And so I also didn't like that because then it didn't feel like I could experience wine authentically. That I had to essentially memorize someone else's way of talking about wine that didn't actually make sense to me. And I think for the most part, that's kind of how we are in the industry. Like we just repeat all these descriptors, but we don't maybe personally connect to them. And I think that's really sad. It'd be like eating a plate of food and then either not enjoying it, but then you're being told you should enjoy it because that is the whatever. And then just being like, no, like I think this tastes like trash. Like I don't like this, right? Or enjoying something and wanting to just express how, like what about it is really hitting you in the core, and then having people kind of be like, all right, like relax, you know? I feel like that's the same thing when we put, you know, the language of wine in a box, a very small box, and it's like you could only pick so many descriptors out of it, and that's just really sad. So why wine was the question. No, I'm getting there. Okay, yeah. But I remember now.
It's a long road.
It's a long road, and I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't think that along the way, I asked myself, why wine? I think I've just gone in the path of this thing that I found grounding, and it makes sense to me, or at least I've made it make sense to me. And I've done that definitely by having to speak two languages of it. Like I had to be okay with saying, okay, when I show up to a sales room, we're gonna all describe this wine as XYZ, and that's just that. But truly, when I'm tasting a wine, even if I'm sitting in a sales room with my colleagues, the first notes of it are my own, because that's what's going to hit your nose. So I log that. I get to sort of like sit with that and just say, wow, that's really cool. It could be good or bad, right? I could smell something, just be like, oh God, and it brings up a really specific thing for me. But then I have to flip to the other side and say, okay, like, what is it though? And then have to describe that in a totally different language that all of us collectively will understand. So it's like being, it's like you've got to be multilingual with wine. And so I think I've learned to do that, although now I'm really trying to veer away from forcing myself to speak wine the way that this industry wants us to speak wine, because I think it's problematic. I rather find ways to talk about wine that can be understood by different people, and so that they feel seen and they feel they can engage with me and not feel like, okay, I'm not going to speak your language of wine, so I probably shouldn't even try. I don't want that. I want us to find ways to communicate with each other. So I would say I didn't know why wine, and I think now, last year actually, because I've had this question now asked of me many times in the last, I would say not even quite a year, but in the recent 8 months. And I think I've always been really grounded by agriculture. I come from an agricultural family back home. I'm from South Sudan and Uganda, so East Africa, and we are very much an agricultural people. And through that, you really, in my experience, is that agriculture, food, community, it's all kind of one and the same, so that you're all taking care of each other, helping each other tend to their lands, and and then food just brings people together. And so because I view wine not much different than food, it's kind of one and the same to me, that's where I grounded myself in wine. So why wine? Because it's something that feels familiar in the weirdest way. Because nobody in East Africa is growing grapes, and we don't drink wine. We don't really drink that much. There's beer and there's spirits, and mostly men drink those things. And so you can imagine that I'm quite an anomaly within my family for being a woman and then drinking alcohol. That's all that for the longest time they understood of my work. It took a long time. And even now, they don't fully understand, but they know that I have a business. So I'm a businesswoman. And that's...
Who drinks wine?
Nope.
Oh.
We don't talk about that part. I'm just a businesswoman. So that's good. I've achieved something. Does that business make money yet? No, but that's okay, because I'm working towards something, and that they can at least say to their friends and relatives, and it makes sense. We don't have a translation for wine and how, the difference between wine and other alcohol. It's just alcohol across the board. I think I found my grounding in wine through agricultural lens. And I think because of that, it's really important to me that the way I get people to engage with wine is from that lens as well. Because then it sort of breaks away that elitism, that wine, the perception of it that it has. I mean, it's not perception, it truly is. I think we're breaking that down now, but of wine being unapproachable, I think the moment that we start talking about how hard it is to grow this thing in dirt, special dirts all over the world, but when we really bring it down to basics, I think then it's not so intimidating to a lot of people, and most people can find that they are, okay, I can understand that, I'm not intimidated by it. And that's really how I want to re-engage people with wine. So now wine. Now it took a long time to get here and figure out my way of essentially how I wanted to continue this path when I decided I wanted to continue this path, this pivot, is that now I'm purposefully following this path with this mission in mind.
So many questions, but we're gonna come back. We're gonna come.
That was one question.
We're gonna come back to that in a second. Tell me about you mentioned being born in Uganda, South Sudan, Uganda. Tell me about life before wine. Tell me about growing up and what what prompted you to come this way.
This way, meaning the U.S. or like here? Okay. So I was born in South Sudan, and South Sudan has always been in constant war and or just unsafe. And so my family fled into northern Uganda. They're in neighboring countries. And so there are a lot of refugees from South Sudan and other parts of East Africa as well. But at that time, definitely from South Sudan in northern Uganda. So so my family, majority of them are in northern Uganda now. That's where we've essentially settled. So it was a progression. We wanted to have access to education, and an opportunity presented itself. My youngest uncle he had never once been home. He was just like from, I don't even know, like a really young age, because we grew up quite fast, and so we're roaming the earth quite early. So he wasn't home. I don't even remember him as a young kid, because he's a little older than me, so I wouldn't have. But I've always even now I think about my memories of him. I was like, oh, he's so cool. He's just like out there. He probably was like 15, but he was out just finding ways. Very clever young man, but found his way into Kenya and was going to a school in Nairobi for a minute. And he met an American student that was studying there, and that's kind of, they built that relationship, and then how their family ended up sponsoring my sister and him to come to the U.S. And then the rest of us follow later. But it was to get us to a place where we could go to school. We put the biggest importance on education. So this was the thing to do. So we came here.
So how old were you?
12.
And where did you start?
New Hampshire. We landed in New Hampshire, from the equator to the North Pole. Yeah, like the tiniest town in New Hampshire. So.
What were your first impressions? What do you remember?
How cold it was. We arrived in November, and there's only been one November date that has felt exactly that same cold. I think it was a couple years ago. I noted it somewhere. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels like that first winter. It was horrible. I wore this lacy pink dress that wasn't even that long, and my shoes were too small for my feet. We didn't have jacket, and we arrived here. We had never felt a cold like this. I mean, the coldest it gets back home is like 50s, and then people think we're all freezing. They think 70s cold. So to come into like a 30-degree and windy was just really, it feels like a nightmare. Like I see it as kind of a dream and nightmare. I was there, but so it was really, really cold. And then maybe 2 weeks later, it snowed. And then we were like, what? We woke up and it was white outside, and that was, my sister and I thought it was sugar. We were like, oh my God, there's so much sugar here. We quickly found out it wasn't sugar. But so I would say the cold was one that I can still feel in my bones. It was just very, everything was foreign, but that was really extra. Yeah, so, and then I think the food was not good. We didn't eat a lot of food here for a while. Just too much of it, and too much of it weird. And Thanksgiving was literally so November 15th we arrived, Thanksgiving is 2 weeks later. That was a lot. Yeah, the biggest chicken we'd ever seen. So I'd say that.
Tell me about getting into the language and into school and starting to kind of find your place? What were some of the successes? What were some of the things that you found yourself happy about in the first couple of years?
I was a really serious kid. So I feel like, I don't know that I would look back and be like, oh, I was so happy about this. I was just like, you're here for school. And so I was just very like I am much nicer now than I was when I was younger. I was really like super focused. And because my sister's younger than me, she's 4 years younger than me, that responsibility of making sure that she was okay fell on my shoulders. And so I felt like I had like responsibility. So make sure that she ate, bathed, went to sleep, got up, went to school. And then, so I took that role very seriously. And so I don't know that I remember like happy times. I wasn't like not happy. It's just like, there's a different definition of happy. Yeah, like we're safe and we have a home and all of that. But yeah, I definitely felt more like, and then I myself was just really struggling in school because I didn't speak any English, and then I was put into 6th grade because of my age. And I was with other students that also didn't speak English, but we didn't share languages, so we couldn't speak to each other, but we just knew we didn't understand what they were saying. And then I had ESL, so English is a second language, where we would have some times where someone or a couple people would come in and like try to teach us English. But a lot of what I learned of English was with the American family that was our host. We, on the weekends, we call them mom and dad. On the weekend, my dad would come and pick us up from our apartment, like 25 minutes away, and take us to stay with them. And then their kids, son and daughter, would then play games with us. And so it was a way for us to like learn. We would read together, and their friends would come in and do readings with us. So yeah, it was great like community. We had a solid community around us, being like the two foreigners in a town of all white people. Definitely diversity went up by like 300% immediately when we showed up. But yeah, so I remember crying a lot in school. I sat in the back and I felt like I was failing. Even though I didn't. But because I had like such a responsibility on me, even though I knew it wasn't my fault that I didn't understand English, I still felt like I was failing. It was really dumb now that I look back. But I was just like, you have like one role, and it's to go to school, and here you are not understanding anything. Like, how are you going to succeed? So that was rough for I feel like for like the first 3 years for sure. That wasn't easy. But we made it through. We speak English now, so yeah.
Was there a turning point?
Yeah, I think when I got to high school, probably like my sophomore year, I remember we changed schools. So the American family eventually were like, okay, you guys need to come live with us permanently, or at least until you are 18. So they actually became our legal guardians. And so we moved in with them, and we changed schools. And so I went to high school where they lived. But yeah, so we changed school systems, and I remember by sophomore year, the school that I went to, they had actually offered to have an ESL person come, and it was just me, right? And I remember feeling so like irritated by that, because I'm like, I'm not special. I was like, I don't need your help, which, yes, I do. Like, they were just there to help me, but I hated that I had to take time, or I actually had like they had scheduled it in my day. Every other, whatever, Tuesday or whatever, that this person would come in, and we had our ESL lessons, and I was just like, I hate this so much. Because to me, it felt like they didn't think I was good enough, which is so dumb, because that's not why they did it. But yes, I think sometime during sophomore year, I was like, I don't need this anymore. I'm okay. And so yeah, then I was like speaking fluent English, enough anyway. I mean, am I ever really speaking fluent English? I don't know. But at that time I was like, no, this is enough, we're fine. So then they actually stopped. Like, okay, if you don't need me, then I guess, yeah. So I would say that was sophomore year in high school was probably, a good turning point when I felt like I got this on my own. We'll figure out the rest later. Yeah, so that would have been, what is that?
16?
Yeah. So, not too long after arriving. Picked up English fast. When you live in a household where English is the language, you actually learn it much faster.
What about food? How long did that take?
A while. Yeah. It just, like, I have a really sensitive nose, so if things smell weird, I just can't. I think even just on the airplane, I think we all like threw up when we were in the airplane. Like, airplane food it's not good. I remember my poor uncle giving me his jacket to puke into. It was rough. But so, and then when we finally arrived, we ate rice because we recognized it, and then like maybe a couple of greens, but not, and then bananas. We could eat bananas. We love bananas. Still love bananas. But it took a while, and like the American family that I lived with definitely like made like white people food, which is, you get used to some of it. I don't make any of it really now, but it was fine, I think. And then when I could figure out where to buy some ingredients to make our own food, I definitely did that. So like rice and chicken is a big deal. More because we made it back home like when we had guests. Even to this day now, actually, I make that dish when I'm either wanting to treat myself or just to feel comfort. So like when I first moved to Oregon, I had really nothing. Like I just moved in with 4 bags and that was it. And I started from scratch. And the first thing was like equip the kitchen because that's really important to me. And then it was like make this chicken stew and have it with rice. And I was like, okay, you're okay. So I remember doing that. And of course, the chicken here is way different than ours. And I tried to cook it like back home and it just like disintegrated to wateriness. It was disgusting. And I was like, why did it cook in like 30 minutes? Because our chicken, they're out roaming about and we don't like raise, I don't know, it's just not the same, done in like 6 weeks kind of GMO chicken. And so usually it requires at least 2 hours of stewing. And so I added the water. I'm like, it's gonna need all that water. And I was like, what is happening? And we usually don't need a lot of spices with our chicken because again, it's stewing for 2 hours. The bones are gonna add to the flavor. And so you just need like onion, oil, tomatoes, salt. And then we started to kind of like add turmeric to our dish, which is part of just having different people in one area. You start sharing different ideas. But that's it, and it's really good. I tried to do that here, and I was like, oh my God, like the water is just like this, there's no sauce. It's watery, and the chicken started falling apart, and I had all this water in the pot, and I was like, oh my God, it was awful. But they had, when we moved here, we stayed with the American family for a couple of months, and then they got us an apartment, or social services got us an apartment 25 minutes from them. And so it was me, my uncle, and I'm definitely cooking. And my uncle continued this habit of like traveling. So he was not home. He was just like wandering about, finding other immigrants from our country and like hanging out with them, which was fine. But here I was at like 12 years old being like, okay. And it was fine as long as there was food in the fridge and like I can cook, I'm grown, I'm okay. So the apartment was kind of like equipped with some spices. So there was some like curry powder and da-da-da-da. And I just started throwing stuff in because I was like, this is so flavorless. And I remember like straining some of the water out and then having to chop up more tomatoes. I was trying to like save this and the flavor was just not there. And the chicken was gross. It's just shredded because I overcooked it. And I was like, I've never experienced that before. So I figured out, of course, it was like, okay, less water this time and all the onions and tomatoes. Just make a massive like base and then have the chicken in there, and then it's not so bad. Still not great, but it's not so bad. But when I finally got it to somewhat resemble something that was familiar from home, it felt good. And we felt like, okay, we're okay. My sister and I, and my uncle was just like gone. So he was not around with us, which was why my American host family were like, so in this country, children do not stay home by themselves. And so they asked the court to have us live with them. So, but the food was gross for a while. Some of it's still pretty gross today, but I don't have to interact with it.
Tell me about getting ready for college and choosing a college and choosing a path. Did you have an idea at that point of what you wanted to do with your life?
Yeah, I always have been that annoying human that's like, I know what I'm doing next. We don't know anything. So I really love cooking to this day. And I watched too many chef shows. So I was scared immediately off of going to culinary school. But I think that's really, when I think about it, I'm like, that's actually where I wanted to go, was to go to culinary school. But yeah, watch Ramsay too many times and hate that guy. Anyway, so the next best thing was hospitality. I was like, well, you still get to interact with people. Turns out I don't love people that much, but it's like you get to interact with people, talk to them about the food. And so I love that, which is, it's not enough food. And I learned that when I went to college and declared a major in hospitality, like certain that's where I was headed. I had a whole vision in my head that did not match with the reality of studying hospitality management. So I think the first year I was like, oh no. And then the second year I was like, oh my God, this is not what I want to study. My professors all had most of them had hotel backgrounds and restaurant background, and they were all priming us to work at the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton. And I was just like, there was nothing about that I wanted. I wanted nothing to do with dressing up and just being stiff and calling people sirs, and I hated all of that. And I remember being like, this has nothing to do with food. This has nothing to do with cooking at all. And so I was kind of in a panic mode, thinking I might have to transfer universities because I didn't think of a backup. I was so certain that this is what I wanted to do. And looking at what was offered at that university, I was like, I have to leave. So enters the dual major in that second year called eco-gastronomy, so the ecology of food. It's really slow food movement. And so I remember going to an introductory meeting. It was the first year they were doing it. And I remember just being like, there it is. Like, that sounds more like my thing, right? Talking about seasonality, regenerative agriculture, indigenous ways of preserving seeds and I was just like, yes. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, I can do these two things together. I can complete my hospitality degree and I can also do this thing. And so that's what I chose to do. And then, of course, I wasn't a US citizen yet at that time, and trying to study abroad with a permanent, not temporary, but more of a permanent pass document was not going to guarantee that I could come back into the country. So that was a real fear. And so I was like, I actually paid for an official document, $750, to have an official document that would allow me to come back into the US. And they were like, well, that still doesn't guarantee you. And I was like, can I have my money back then? It was like, no. So I just lost $750. And I was like, okay, well, we're just not going to risk it. And so I skipped the first year, which I think I was glad for, because the first students that went were definitely guinea pigs of this program. And so I skipped it, studied, and became a US citizen, took my test, passed, and got a passport. And I was like, okay, this year I'm going to study abroad. And I did. So the second year of the program, I studied abroad in Polenzo, so University of Gastronomic Sciences, right near Bra, which is where, I don't know if you know who Carlo Petrini is. Yeah, so the father of slow food. He actually lived in that town, so sometimes we see him walking in the piazza. We're like, oh my God, that's the man. So weird. Hello. That's our celebrity. At least mine anyway. So yeah, getting to Italy for this program and studying that. I mean, I'm only there for a semester, so it's not a full immersion, but I got enough to feel like, to be like, that feels more like my world than hotel management for fancy folks. And I remember we would walk, most of the time we walked back, as the American students, we would walk back from class, like home after school. And we were walking by vineyards and you'd see people in there. And so just without thinking about it, I'd witness wine and vineyard and people, right? And then also whenever we would go out to eat, just how easily wine was on the table or you can order it. I mean, we were definitely not old enough by American standards to be drinking wine, but they didn't even ask for IDs. We didn't look too young, but we probably weren't old enough, you know. And it was fine. And so we didn't speak Italian. We certainly didn't know wine. So we would just ask for whatever the house red or house white was, or we'd just be like, we'll have a Chianti. I don't know what that is. Like, that sounds good. Probably picked most of it by price points because we are students on a budget. But it was just like no one made any big deal about it, you know. It just, yeah, it felt, that made sense to me. And so all of it together, I started to envision this life where, so here comes where the bread enters in, but started to envision this life where I wanted to be able to have my own, for a long time I didn't want to call it a bistro because even bistro sounded too big, but I wanted to have this space where it was like 5 people. I apparently never wanted to make money, but like 5 tables, 5 small tables that I wanted to keep it small because I want to do everything by myself. Maybe have one other person. But the idea was to have this place where it was a wood-fired oven and you cooked everything out of the wood-fired oven. And it was focused on seasonality and sourcing as local as possible. I wanted to have a big garden where I could source as much of the things I needed for that as I could. Set menu that changed quite often with the season, but you came in and you got the menu. Like, there wasn't like, can we? No. This is what we're cooking. And I still to this day I love that. Whenever I walk into a place and you get that 1-page menu, you're like, sweet. We'll take all of it. Like, it's just, I love that. Whenever I go to a place and there's 15 pages, I'm like, no, this food cannot be good. There's no way you can make any of these, all of it, well. And that you have all these ingredients ready. That's just not reality. So whenever I go to a place and I have that I'm like, no, this is not gonna be good. And it never is, at least to me. So one menu that changed often, and I feel like I had a very Italian way of viewing things. It was like, you come to my restaurant, you sit down, I give you what I give you, right? Like, you're not, there's no choices. You get a couple of bottles of wine and that's the end, but it's going to be amazing. You're gonna feel the love in the food and really enjoy your time there with your friends, but know that it's not an option to choose different things. And I really love that. I think the places that I am excited to go to is when it's a menu like that. Some people are annoyed. I think mostly Americans are really annoyed with like, oh my God, like this is it? It's like, yes, and it will be done well. I guarantee you those things are fresh because they can manage, from a cost perspective, manage to have those things in place. But yes, so wanted to have this beautiful bistro, this romantic idea around it, and of course wine was gonna be a big part of it, right? So I come back to the States and I'm like, bistro, wood-fired oven. And it was like, you need to learn how to use a wood-fired oven. So when I saw the ad for a baker's apprentice in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, I didn't read anything else past the wood-fired oven. That was it. And I had my host family drive me 6 hours in the middle of winter to interview for 15 minutes for this job, this apprenticeship, and then drive back, and I got it. So I moved out right after graduation. No, I didn't actually go to my graduation. It's like, just mail it to me. You've taken so much of my money, just mail me the degree, it's fine. So, but yeah, I left because I'd finished, I actually graduated the next spring because of the previous situation with my documents. So yeah, I was like, my classmates already left. I'm not going to graduation with the next classmates, you know, I don't know them. So, but yeah, so I was in Pennsylvania for 6 months learning how to use a wood-fired oven, and that's how I fell in love with bread, and then went to bread. And then kind of, yeah, that pivot did have a reason, because I knew pivoting into wine, I was both had that introduction, and I thought it would be crucial to that bistro someday. And so, yeah, it's kind of, there was a reason. I maybe just didn't put all the dots together, but I definitely knew that it was a useful pivot to go into, that it wouldn't be a waste of time. And now I'm there 9 years ago.
We're still waiting on that bistro.
The bistro's there, just like with the bakery. Maybe they're one and the same. Yeah, because if you have a wood-fired oven, then you can cook and bake in there. So.
I need to eat your bistro.
Listen, it's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be open like 3 times a week.
Whenever you feel like it.
Yep. I'd be like, yeah, today I wanna cook for people. We're open, sign on. But that's when I don't, you know, so we're not doing it for a while. This is gonna be a retired job where I just do it for the love of it, pay what you want. At this point, just come in and have a good time. But so not doing that for a while because I definitely need to make money. But it's still very much there because I still see it in my head. But I also laugh at myself for thinking that was I'm like, what experience, what money did I have to open a bistro? But if I have learned anything about myself is that we envision first, then we figure out the rest later. So one by one, we get there anyway. So if I really wanted that bistro to happen, I imagine that I would have figured out how to do it. Yeah, so.
For one glorious week, it would have been open.
It would have been amazing. It would have been amazing. And then be like, you know what? Maybe for later. Maybe do this later. But yeah.
So when you made the pivot into wine, obviously you had a notion from your trip in Italy of what wine was, what wine culture could be.
Yeah.
Then you went and worked in a wine shop in the U.S. So tell me about that the kind of change and about starting to learn wine from that side of things, from a less romantic side and a more sort of business side. What was the shop? Where was the shop first of all, and what was the experience there like?
Yeah. So the shop was in Boston. And I actually liked this shop because we made it about welcoming people, which I think sometimes intimidated people. They didn't want to walk in and all of us be like, hello, welcome. They're like, whoa, I just want to go in a corner, pick my whatever bottle and come and have you ring me out. But that's not how we did it. It was very much, we were really attentive to anyone who walked through the door. I think the layout of the shop was intimidating for people, and also the fact that they didn't have any recognizable brands. So immediately people walk in, they don't see what they usually get, and they just want to leave. But our job was to say, no, it's all right. Like, what do you usually drink? Okay, well, we have this, it's quite similar. Oh, okay, you know. Then they were kind of okay. But most of the time it was like, did I walk into the wrong building? And then they just like leave. So that was a bit of a disappointment, but what I liked from this experience was that the people that we did have that stayed, we like didn't run away immediately. We built a relationship with them. We started to learn their palate, and therefore, whenever some new wine would come in, we would say, "Oh, you know who would love this, right?" So then, whenever they would come in, we'd say, we have something for you, we really want you to try it. And I love that. I love getting to know people's palate and then suggesting something that they would really enjoy. And then we tasted a lot of wine. So that's really how my palate went from to really quickly. I think I started the job and hadn't gone home for about 4 months to visit my host family. And I was like, all right, it's time to go home. And my mom was really excited. And she goes, I got you a bottle of your favorite wine. And at that time, oh God, I think it's a Washington company or a winery company. 14 Hands. Love that wine back then. And so she was so nice. She was like, I got you your favorite bottle of wine. And I remember opening it and smelling and just being like, oh my God. Like, just the nose alone, I immediately like imagined the headache, like the worst headache the next day, because all I saw was just like this fruit, like sweet, syrupy wine. Not to say that fruity wines are bad, because they're not, but it just, I mean, I could now smell like I feel like what I would probably think were oak chips in there, just overly vanilla-y and so she wasn't offended at all. I was like, I'm not gonna drink this. She goes, that's okay. So I had a margarita instead. I love margarita, so I had that instead. But yeah, within that 4 months, my palate had changed drastically. So we were tasting almost every other day or every day, because we have sales reps that come in, right, throughout. And because they wanted us to all know what the wines were so that we could, again, have these meaningful engagement with our wine customers, we all had to taste these wine. And that was really incredible for me. I don't learn from books. I need to do the thing. And so my palate really changed, which was great. Yeah. So I would say that, I love that. And then of course they paid for my WSAT as well, which is quite, not cheap.
What wines did you find yourself being drawn to?
To start out, I think I really like I still to this day like a fruit-forward wine. I need some fruit in my wine. I'm really sensitive to high acid. So if it's just like singularly acidic, it really hurts my tongue. Like it feels like a cat is just scratching my tongue, which I don't know why I would know how that feels, but could imagine claws in my tongue. Never had a cat scratch my tongue. But yeah, so I need some fruit to sort of balance that acidity. But even then, sometimes if the acidity is so high, the fruit's not going to save my tongue, right? So I think earlier on, I was really drawn to softer reds that a little bit of fruit there, but weren't so tannic. I'm definitely sensitive to tannins as well, because they're just really grippy. So I like more of a softer tannin. So red blends tend to be an easier go-to, or even Italian reds, like, I can handle the tannins of Dolcetto and maybe not Barolo. Now I can with time, but back then that would have been too much for me. But yeah, so some rustic Italian reds that were super easy, that felt, they're familiar in a way. To this day, I feel like I can always tell when a wine is from Italy. All of them, no matter where they're made, have this like decaying leaves thing. Like that earthiness, like decaying leaves and briny black olives. So I'm always like, that's an Italian red. I don't know where it's from. We can go to the next level to do that, but I can kind of almost pick it out. So I would say those were the easier ones, and I think white wines probably took me a little bit longer to like, just because of the acidity. Yeah, but now I really gravitate toward white wine more.
Tell me about the WSET experience for you.
It was hard. I think in that time, I was, again, because I hadn't gotten to this sort of way of analyzing wine language and wine education, so I was learning it as is, because that's just the way. But I can very much remember what was in there, and now when I look back, I'm like, oh my God, it's so problematic. I actually hated. Okay, I hated it. I remember thinking, It's only the Brits that can write about wine and make you fall asleep every other page. I hope they've updated it, and I don't mind saying that out loud. That book was so dry, and I would just, again, I don't learn from reading things, or at least it has to be followed by, an actual demonstration. And because I wasn't sitting in a classroom, it was an online. How do you study about food and wine online? It's a terrible way to learn this particular subject. But yeah, I really struggled through it because I just was like, they just couldn't make this any more fun. That's really crazy. And the instruction we had was like, you must know this book from first page to the last page. And so there's a lot packed in there. And I get nervous taking tests. I think it's the part of me that's like, you must get an A. Even to this day, I hate it because I have to do well. And so I was just so nervous, and in my head, I was like, okay, there's a little section, a few pages on Greece, which I couldn't pronounce any of the names. To this day, I still can't. Sirtico, I can do that. But couldn't do that. I struggled at first through Germany because I couldn't say, now I can say all of them, but I couldn't pronounce them. I couldn't even, how when you're reading, you can just make up the sound of a word. I would get stuck in my mind trying to read the word. I was like, I don't even know how to attempt doing that. So I really struggled. And then France, to me, specifically Burgundy, to this day is one of the hardest wine regions for me to understand. I think it's one of those that I just need to go visit and it'll make more sense. It's crazy, but trying to understand the classifications, I think, why did you do that? That's unnecessary. So I would say that book, I threw it away after. I recycled it, but I definitely was like, I'm not keeping that book in my life, so I recycled it. But I did throw it into the recycling bin. I did like that. I was like, I will never need that book. I hated it. But you just test. You do the test, you say what they want you to say, and then you pass it. And that's the part I think now I'm very critical of, is that you have to answer those questions the way that the people grading them want you to answer them. And I think that is really problematic because... And I was really nervous about the tasting portion, which ended up being the easiest part for me. I failed theory the first time, and I had to retake it again, and it was fine. But, you have to describe that wine this way, whatever it is. So if we're doing a blind tasting, and I'm supposed to guess that wine, you want me to describe something I'm guessing in the exact words that you are looking for. That doesn't make sense to me, but I did it. I got it, right? I think it's a really problematic thing. I look at WSET now, it hasn't really changed much. I think they've added a couple of lines under the tasting descriptors for things. I think they added very overly spiced food, which I was like, that sounds like a problem. That sounds like you think it's problematic. But anyway, I think they've added that, and the answer is Riesling. But I just did it because it was the thing you do, but now I look back and I just think, yeah, that's a massive problem. So
you talked about the next step for you being going in distribution, again, a whole other kind of side of things. So tell us about where that took you, so I guess geographically, and also about starting to get into that part of the business.
Yeah. So moving into distribution, I saw it as another way for me to really understand wine. I think, being with this wine shop, I just got to a point where there was no more upward mobility, and it was, but I knew there was so much more to wine that I still wanted to learn. And at this time, so I was with the wine shop for about 1.5 years. In that time frame, I was just like a student. I was taking everything, and I loved it, right? I love learning. Didn't necessarily start analyzing the issues with it, but just like I maybe haven't really done much, but I never analyzed the issue with the English language as much, right? I didn't, because it's not mine. I don't get to have a problem with it. It's not mine. So with wine, which I think can be anyone's language, I get to have a problem with it, especially when we're saying that it can't be everyone's or shouldn't be everyone's language. That's problematic. But yeah, so I wanted to learn more, really, really excited, and distribution seemed like the next thing. Being able to, and also just understanding other parts of the wine industry as a whole, that was going to be another realm of it, called, that people like to refer to distribution as the dark side. And so everybody's like, oh, you're going to the dark side, which I kind of now understand, actually. It's quite, yeah, it's a lot in there. But yeah, so for me, it's always like in search of understanding something more. And if I can keep learning and I'm excited about the subject, then I want to keep going. And so that was kind of the same thing. So I went into distribution, and my first year, so the company I worked for is an umbrella company. Like over the years, I don't need to say the names, but over the years, they've acquired smaller distribution companies, and so they just call them divisions. And so when I first arrived, I worked for one division that carried all of the brands that I had never worked with. Don't need to mention them. Very, very big, very big. And then, but coming from a high-end wine shop to that, I definitely was a bit snooty, but I'm also never feeling like I'm above my job. So I'll still do it, and I'll do it as well as I can, but I was just like, oh, God, fine. And I remember in my interview, the VP saying, now I know this is not what you were hoping to start at, but start here, and we are always looking to move people around. So as soon as a position within, we think you'd be better here, as soon as something opens there, we will get you there. And they were right. They are more than happy to move people around, because it is one company, just different culture still exists within the divisions. They essentially come intact, right? And so a year later, there was a position open, and my manager reached out to me and said, hey, they're interviewing for this. I'm going to cover you for the day. Please go interview. And so it was great. And so then I moved to where it felt like, okay, we're back on track to the kinds of wines that I'm interested in, but also that I'm more familiar with. And so then I was there for about 3 years doing that. Learned.
And where were you located?
Boston. Yeah, so my territory that I covered was essentially Boston and some of the surrounding towns as well. A lot of driving. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, I think with that, I really liked being able to present to my clients. And I would say that I was not the best sales rep. I like to consider myself more of a consultant. Because to me, you know, rather than just try to hit my goal, and it doesn't matter who I get these things onto, I always wanted to look at my client's business individually and say, okay, I think this from our portfolio would work for them, and not necessarily like I need to hit X, Y, Z. I'm just gonna dump it on everybody, which I just couldn't do. It just never felt right. So from that, I always say I was never a good sales rep, but definitely a much, much better consultant. And I did well. I didn't hit the goals, but I brought in money, so it was fine. They didn't slap my wrist, it was fine. Yes, I learned a lot. I learned about the 3-tier system and kind of how, you know, wine gets from here to the shelves in wine shops and on restaurant menus. And I think that has been a really important thing to have, for sure. There are some issues there as well, but I can only tackle one issue at a time. But it was really good. I got to taste so many wines, and again, just helping my palate understand more. And then I think here is where I started to see and feel that disconnect. I think in particular, I was starting to find my own voice in how I wanted to talk about wine. I love this portfolio that I was working with. I really liked a lot of what was in there, and so, you know, I would read up about the producers and try to then like tell their story to my clients, and I would get really excited about that. And whenever the winemakers or the brand ambassador would come through and tell us their story, and I'd really like cling on to that, like super excited, and then I had something to like go and talk to my clients about in my own way, and I like that. It's when I would host these different tastings for my clients, especially retail shops, that people would come in to taste, and I could see that like, oh my gosh, I must have like the worst palate, da 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 da. And I was like, truly not, right? The moment that I was behind the table, they felt like they had to devalue their own experience of wine. They're experiencing it now and saying, oh my gosh, I have like a terrible palate. Like you would never drink what I drink at home. And I just thought, well, you don't know that. But also, you don't need to say that to me just because I am a wine professional or I'm a somm. I'm not. I've never been a somm, but people only know of us, all of us collectively as somms, unless we're winemakers and whatnot, we're somms. They don't really understand the difference, which is okay. But yeah, so seeing that hesitation in people, especially younger people as well, it really bothered me. And then especially, I think, demographic from historically marginalized communities who would find the courage to walk into a wine shop and then see me, and they're really excited. And then they're like, I don't know how to do any of this, like I don't, you know. And I was just like, no, like it's okay, right? And so I started to talk to them in this way that I now talk about wine, and trying to make it make sense to them, and really encourage them to not feel intimidated by it, because ultimately they need to know that I could never tell them how they should experience a wine, that what they're experiencing, it's so personal that I can't be dictating it, and that's their power. And to always feel encouraged to ask questions. If someone describes a wine in a way that they don't understand, to never be afraid to say, well, what does that mean, right? That's to be inquisitive. Because the more inquisitive they are of us wine professionals, the more that it puts us on our toes, and we have to be better. But if we remain in this position, I think we're getting a little bit better now, but in this position where it's like we're just on a high horse talking down to people, then that intimidation remains in place. And so I always try to give them permission, not that I should be the person, but just to encourage them to always be inquisitive. And if you're really excited about something, you could be like, I really like this wine and I don't know why, there's something about it, it's okay. And then you could say like, it's like there's salt in there, but I was like, what? Just say words. And if we're listening enough, we'll find ways to stitch it for you, you know, in a way that makes sense back to you. So yeah, I think that was kind of like the catalyst of me thinking, of like me really beginning to feel like there has to be a different way that we do this as an industry. And so yeah, just going along. And it wasn't until I started doing DEI work with the company, and then I thought I was going to pivot into DEI and do DEI for the industry as a consultant. But I was kind of just, other things happened at the company that I was really disappointed with, and I just thought, yeah, you know what, like between not feeling like I could really make an impact in how people engage with wine while I'm here, as well as then like not being able to do this work that's necessary because the company was not, like most company, really ready to commit to what true DE&I is. I was just like, I can't be here. I'm too frustrated. And so I left without a job lined up, which I had never done in my life. It's a very un-immigrant thing to do. But so is my path so far here. So I left and I was like, I just need a break. And I took 2 months off. And I think when I left, I still thought that I was going to go into DEI. I took a 3-month course through Cornell online on DEI, got that certificate, and I was like, this work is so meaningful, I'm going to do it, and you know what, I'm going to be a consultant for the industry because we need it. And then started seeing the frustration within my company, and I thought, you know, it's not different out there. I'm just going to hit the same wall out there. And so I backed out of that idea, and I thought, how do I do DEI in a way that makes sense to me, right? And so I do a lot of trail running. That's when I meditate. That's when I do a lot of thinking, and it was really in those runs where I was trying to figure out how to do something that was impactful for the industry, and then for people that never felt seen in the wine space. Cultures that never felt represented, or cuisines that were never talked about. And so all of that just started to come together. Basically, the pieces of my experiences, me as a person, and my lived experiences, everything kind of started to almost like come together. And that was literally how I formed a wine linguist, in thinking we need to change the language and culture of wine so that it's more inviting of a much more broader demographic, whether that's generationally or culturally. Like, we've got to open this up. And to me, I thought we can focus on amplify, like to me, I have like 3 pillars. It's cuisines is part of it, is we need to bring more diverse cuisines, especially of the global south and diaspora, into the language of wine. We need to bring in winemakers, and everything that happens from the ground up needs to be part of the language of wine. So winemakers, vineyard stewards, agriculture, regenerative agriculture, like all of this before the bottle needs to be part of the language of wine. And then consumers also need to be part of the language of wine. Their sensory reference place and their cultural background needs to find its way in the way we talk about wine. So, the wine linguist.
Once the idea is formed,
Yeah.
What's your next step?
Well, I mean, the idea is much more formed now than it was then. It was definitely it was like we have to address these different parts, and it kind of came much better together. And so I started out, when I left, what did I do when I came back 2 months later? I did the LLC, because now I don't remember. It's only been literally like, this is going in my 3rd year as the wine linguist. I don't know how I'm forgetting. It wasn't like 15 years ago. Lots has happened. But I remember getting invited to speak at Assemblage here in Oregon. Yesterday when I was at Alt Wine Fest was my first time back to Abbey Road, and it felt like a very surreal moment. I was like, this is where it started. But yes, I spoke at Assemblage. In the talk then, I shared stage with another colleague called Decolonize Your Palate.
Oh, that would have been 21?
22.
22?
Mm-hmm. And we talked about, for me, was about how we needed to expand the language we use and focusing on food, right? Talking about how here specifically in the US, wine professionals aren't really going beyond the cuisines that are really more like French, Italian, and whatnot when it comes to talking about wine, but they're never veering off into the global south cuisines. And the only answer they have for Asian food, which is so stupid to say that, is Riesling. Like, Asia is a whole landmass, and you have one wine that you can recommend, or other varietals that have exotic notes. Mm-hmm. So, Gewürztraminer. Guess I like Gewürztraminer, but there's never a part of me that think, let me have that with curry. Like zero. It'd be like having cream with butter. More like just make it as rich as possible, right? There has to be a better balance than that. And I think it's like, no, just put the foreign thing with the foreign thing. That's, we don't like those varietals. We don't know what to do with them. We don't know those cuisines. We don't know what to do with them. Just put those together. It almost seemed to me like that was like the solution to it. It might not be, but yeah, so focus on that and saying we have to expand the cuisines that we represent or talk about, right? And you have to think about it from the perspective of like, you may say that, okay, you can't drink red wine with spicy food because it elevates the heat. And I'm like, and that's a bad thing to you, but not in cultures where they're eating Thai chili like it just fries. You know what I mean? No one's doing that. But we can really handle heat, right? Like in Thailand, like Thai chili is one of my favorite chilies, but it's very specific. Mm-hmm. And just the smell alone, like it's a lot, right? So if I have like a shaved mango and papaya salad with say nuts, and you've got mint in there, you've got lime juice, and there's a sweetness to it, right? There's a lot happening in there. You really think that Riesling, and you didn't even say what like sweetness level or dryness level of Riesling. You just said Riesling. That's your solution to that. So it's spicy, it's a little sweet, it's a little salty, there's other stuff, and then Riesling. That seems really lazy to me. And I have issues with that laziness because I think to myself, okay, Italian food is not American food, and yet you've taken the time to be like, I know 5 wines, I will go with 5 Italian sauces. You made that effort, but you're choosing to not do it for the other culture's food. That was, at least for my portion, was the conversation that like, let's expand how we think about other cuisines and then redirect how we want to pair wine with those cuisines. But yeah, so I think I started more of like, seminars and attending them as well as speaking at them, teaching a couple of wine classes, one at my alma mater. So I went, it was crazy. I sat in that classroom. It wasn't the same one because they'd built a new one with my money, but I don't recognize that university. I go and I'm like, I don't know where anything is. They've built so much. And I'm like, so that's where all my tuition went. But anyway, so it was still very surreal to be standing in front of 85 students and teaching them in this classroom where, for me, wine essentially started. It was pretty cool. So did that and taught a class in San Francisco at a smaller wine school. And so it's just slowly been, going. And I think now it's a little bit more recognized of a work. And I think earlier on, I think my turning point actually happened this February when I was speaking at the Oregon Wine Symposium, thank you, where I could see the room of people engaging. Because before I feel like, it was kind of like, yeah. Like I was definitely saying things that people were just like, that sounds like doom and gloom. We don't want to listen to that. And then I felt them be more engaging. And that felt good because I'm like, okay, so you hear me. Like I'm here for us as an industry. I'm not saying you're problematic. I'm saying we collectively have an issue and we need to address it in order for this industry to thrive. And so I feel like even this year, just seeing the numbers kind of going a little south, it's like, what do we do? Oh my God. I'm like, you're panicking as if you didn't know that this was coming. And that frustrates me. It's like driving on a road and seeing the first sign that says, in 10 miles, there's road work, turn around. 5 miles, 3 miles, 1 mile off the cliff, and you're trying to sue the state for driving off the cliff when they warned you along the way. It frustrates me. So it's like we're here now and we're seeing, the numbers of especially younger generation engaging less with wine, and we're just like, oh my God, these damn millennials won't drink enough wine. And I'm like, first off, rephrase that. We're not trying to have a generation of alcoholics. Let's rephrase that. But also, how are you engaging with them with wine? Because it's not like we don't know what they want us to do, right? We just haven't been listening and have chosen to kind of just keep the status quo, and that's no longer working. So I feel like this is kind of like where my work is coming in. It's like bringing back wine to its basics and engaging with a broader audience, both, whenever I say that, it's not very specific, but I'm thinking like generationally, right? How do we speak to different generations in their own language of wine that makes sense? And then culturally, how do we start to engage with a diverse culture, right? To me, because I'm so food-centered, I think of how do we help them see themselves as a part of the wine industry or wine world. And that's through food. It's showing how wine goes with their food, that they can see themselves represented, right? So I think there are a couple of ways we can do it, and it can be really fun. No one has to, I don't think it has to be as hard as people make it out to be, but I see that it is hard. So.
Okay, so that's obviously that's a big task. So tell me about, well, actually, we'll get to that in a second. Tell me why you're in Oregon. You mentioned coming to Oregon for assemblage. Why are you here now?
Oh man. So I decided to move to Oregon like one morning. That was it. I kid you not. I had not thought about this. Like some of my friends here will tell you that last year I was very adamant that I could never live here. Not so much that I didn't think it was beautiful and whatnot, but it was, Oregon is so far from the world to me. You know, I have family in Africa, I have friends all over the world, and it is so far. Like a 9-hour plus time difference is too much, right? So, and then Boston, I was like, the time it takes for me to fly from Oregon to here, I could be anywhere in Europe. Literally. And I'm like, so no, I'm not gonna live here. So joke's on me, because I'm here. So yeah, I was very much like, even when I came in February, I was like, okay, this was nice. So I get to come back to Oregon, do my thing, go back. And it's weird because now I can see a little bit of it making sense. When I left here in November after my internship, my harvest internship, I just couldn't like get back into Boston. Throughout winter, I was always cold, and that's never a thing because I've lived there and New England like since arriving to the States, so I've acclimated to the weather. But for some reason, I couldn't find my place again, and I hadn't thought much about it. I was just like, I'm just tired. I worked a lot, and I just need rest, right? And then, yeah, one day I just spoken to that. We had like an online forum, and was again addressing wine language and da 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 da. And I was just sitting there. I was like, the work I want to do, which is a docuseries that I want to start producing with a team of one. But to tell the story of Oregon, and not just Oregon, this would just be the first wine region, but I'm a very visual person, and I like having full stories. And so it's how I understand a lot of things, but how I understand wine and how I want to help people understand and connect with wine is to really paint them a fuller picture of a wine region. And so Oregon made sense because I was like, okay, I've been there, and it would be a good place to start. But in my mind at that time, I was like, okay, we're gonna need to fly to Oregon, and we'll probably be there for a couple of weeks shooting, and then we'll fly back. And then I said something to a friend who's here, and I don't know to this day what we said, but she said, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you lived here. And it was really late at night, and I just said, ha ha ha, and I fell asleep. And then I woke up in the morning, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, fly there, back at, And so, while still in bed, I literally messaged all of the people I knew asking for different things. Sophia was one of them with a couple other winemakers. I asked them if they knew a winemaker needing part-time help. I asked a woman I just met in February who has lived here, and I asked her if she knew of a dealership she trusted. I needed a place to buy a car. And then I asked a couple of people of their suggestions of places to live and or if they had a landlord contact, and that was it. And everybody came through. And in 3 weeks, I packed 4 bags and moved.
That's incredible.
So I'm here.
And so you got here?
Mid-March.
Mid-March. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's wild.
Yeah.
Well, we also skipped over the fact that you worked a harvest internship here.
I did.
So we need to talk about that.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Oh, yeah. So last year, I did my cellar internship with Remy Wines, and that was awesome. Liked physical work, hence why baking and farming and all of that, and just also having appreciation for that work. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I found in my head, I'm always trying to. I have this massive puzzle, and I collect the pieces. So this was one of the pieces. I was working for a winemaker or working with a winemaker and just learning everything that I could about what it takes to make a bottle of wine possible. And so I asked Remy to I asked her if I could experience all of it as much as I could, which is not very hard because there's like 3 of us. She's like, say less. You're gonna have to do everything anyway. So first started out with a lot of cleaning, which now I know 2/3 of winemaking is cleaning. I really learned a lot, and even on days when I would go home and I just wanted to break, I still felt this great sense of accomplishment. Not to be tasted till the next year, but you felt like you were doing something that would result in something, and I truly enjoyed that. It is not easy work. It really isn't. But again, I like that kind of work, and so I really appreciated it. Yeah, so I learned a lot. And I also, last year, was doing bi-weekly updates, where I shared, so every 2 weeks, I would share essentially what I learned in that time. And people really seemed to engage with it. They felt like I was bringing them along the journey, and they'd never seen that, or da-da-da. And so I was like, good, because that was the intention. And it was kind of a way to gauge this idea that I now am getting at, which is a docu-series. How interested are people in wanting to be brought down to the ground level of how things are done? And I think that there's a lot of interest there. At least I saw that through the engagements I was getting last year. So I really love that. I would do it again if it financially made sense, but not this year. Yeah.
So before we talk about the project and kind of the scope and where you're headed, tell me about, obviously, a lot of your focus is on sort of underrepresented backgrounds, or people who have not generally had access to wine, or culturally have not had access to wine. So tell me about some of the key, I guess, sort of the key things from your perspective. What are the biggest changes that can happen to bring more people into the industry that have not historically been in the industry?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was thinking yesterday, as I do every day, sorry, but I tend to have these conversations. I think I interview myself all the time, but no, I tend to have these conversations where, I realize that I've always been in a unique position, just like I am, for the most part, I've always been like one of one, or like one of very few in any given setting, and so I'm very used to that. But I realize that not everybody is used to that. And so in thinking about tasting rooms alone here, I work in 2 of them, and I've been to a couple of them. Plan is to go to a lot more now that I have some time on my hand. But just even in thinking about the sort of slower engagement in tasting rooms, and everyone's feeling that, so it's not necessarily like, oh, people don't feel comfortable going. Something else is definitely more of a factor for that. But still, in thinking about tasting rooms and getting more younger people, let's focus on that, to come taste. I think about when they first walk in through a tasting room door, what that must feel like to them, right? And so I am at Soder at the moment. Have you ever been?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you get the greeting thing, right? I think it's brilliant because it just cuts any scary feeling you have about going into a tasting room at the door, but actually before you get to the door. And I think it's I wish that more people would do this kind of thing.
You're here, have some wine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, don't be scared. We're like, hi, have a rosé. Everything's gonna be okay. Right? And I really love that because I think it just breaks, it disrupts whatever kind of fear you might feel, even if you weren't necessarily aware of it, it's there, I still kind of have it even though I work in the industry. But when I have it is because I know how I'm walking in. Me, right? And I just have to let it go. I'm this has always been the case since I arrived to the country, that I'm gonna be the only one walking in, and I'm most likely gonna be the only one in my time that I'm tasting here, which is a Black woman, right? So I'm used to that, and it's not as like burdensome, but it truly is for people. And so going back to a younger generation, right, millennials and I mean even Gen X. Let me not leave out Gen X, right? Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zs, like wine is still intimidating, and so when you walk up to a tasting room, you feel like you're in their house and you have to act a certain way and all of that. And I'm like, no, we need you to come in. They need you to come in. And so they're there to welcome you. Not that you should act a fool, because people do that. They show up to a tasting room and they think that's their space and they can do whatever, and that's not the case. But certainly, we don't want you to feel like, you all of a sudden have to sit straight and you could only do the right things and whatnot. No, I think we genuinely want you to come in so we can tell you the story, our story, and share our wines with you. And hopefully you love it and can take some back with you, right? But just in me seeing in my head even how we can change that so that more people feel less intimidated to come into tasting rooms is a big deal. And so with that, yeah, like a diverse demographic. I get so excited at Soder when I see a younger group of people or, a couple of friends, and even more excited when they're of color. Not because but I'm like, you found the courage and you're here.
Tell me about this project that's in your head, the docu-series.
Yeah.
Tell me about, let's talk about, just focus on the Oregon part of it. What is the story you want to tell here, and how are you going to tell it?
Yeah, so, the docu-series is definitely on pause. I really want to do this well, and I want to do it beautifully. And that requires me doing some groundwork, whether that's researching the people that I want to be part of the story and how that sort of unfolds into the bigger story. It's going to take me time. So in the meantime, I'm doing much smaller conversations with winemakers. I've divided it into categories. So, for example, one of them is regenerative agriculture and/or biodynamic. They're different, I learned recently. Always learning. So I really love that. And I love being able to have conversations with people, say, okay, what does biodynamic mean to you? Or what does regenerative agriculture mean to you? And so I still want to have, and I'm sharing this with people, the platform I really want to use is going to be YouTube and then highlights on Instagram. I really don't want to do a lot on Instagram. I have no ownership over it. It could be gone tomorrow, So I want YouTube to be where I house all of this. But my goal with that is to have conversation with these different people within these categories. So that was just one of the categories. To be able to then start painting a picture of what this looks like based on who's where doing what. Other categories would be varietals, like what are the different varietals that are being grown here in the valley? Because people still think of Willamette Valley just as a Pinot Noir land. And so there's a ton. There's so many cool things here, right? Then we can move into bubbles. There's incredible bubbles being made here that still is not really known about either, right? So finding different ways, and then as well as farmers, because I can't just do wine. It's always wine and food. So farmers as well as cooks and chefs that are here in the valley that, again, I feel are really integral, thank you, to the whole story. Because a region isn't just made up of one thing happening. I think there are different elements, and for me, I want to focus on food, agriculture, and the people that are involved in all of that. So yeah, that's the vision. But that's okay. So I'm doing that initial sort of research by having conversations with these people and doing it it's kind of like this, maybe not as long as this. So I got some editing to do myself as well. I was like, you can't be putting out like an hour-long video. Who's gonna watch that? But I also want to force people to just slow down. We need to get back to watching long form things. Like it can't just be 30 seconds of flashy things and then that be how we communicate. I don't want that. That's not how I consume information. And so we're gonna try, but I'm gonna just be hopeful that when I set the tone that this is long form, hopefully that people will know, like, okay, I gotta sit down for this, or okay, got a long drive ahead of me, I can listen to this, right? So that's where we're at. I did my first one with Johan. We had a great time, lots of tangents.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, which I love because, I said to them that I didn't want this to be this like stiff, next. I was like, I hate watching those videos where you see a wine professional or on the sort of that side speaking with a winemaker or whatever, and it's just so awkward and stiff. I'm like, no, like what? This is so much more fun than this. I want to know your story. I'm excited about your story, and I want to taste your wine. Like, tell me what you were thinking when you're doing this, right? How did you do this? Because this is so unique and whatever. I think that's way more fun. And if we go off tangent, then perfect. It means that you're comfortable. So it was really cool, and I watched some of it back after realizing I didn't have my mic. But the way I'd set it up was basically we sat next to each other, camera was there, and the iPhone camera picked up great sound. I was like, thank God. So I got as much of it as possible, and of course the last wine, something happened with the camera. It went into like a time loop. Everything is slow. I was like, well, I don't know what button got hit. I've never seen that happen. But all of a sudden, it's normal time. Then it's like, I'm like, what? It went into slow-mo. And I'm like, well, thank God it was the last wine. We can just cut it out. It's fine. It's just really sad.
Someone turned the drama button on.
I don't know what happened. Because my camera died at one point. Charger. And so we had to charge it in, and I don't know. But I was like, that's all right. We got a good amount of this, and I'm gonna go back in the morning tomorrow and take shots of the photos of the vineyard. It was just too bright. Like by noon, the sun was just too much. The lighting was not great. So gonna try to edit that together and see if that feels the way I'm envisioning. But I'm trying really hard not to put so much pressure on myself as a perfectionist, which keeps me from doing things sometimes. But yeah, so we're gonna start telling the story. And so the story here is that I want everyday people to start to associate wine with human beings, right? They're just human beings. And when you hear how hard this work is and, how their vintage went or the stories they have, I hope that it like breaks that barrier of intimidation. That's the vision.
Okay, so it's a big vision, and we'll talk a little bit about that to wrap up the interview. But before we talk about that, I'm curious about your perceptions of the organ industry. Obviously, you've been here a few times. You're not brand new to it, but still pretty new. What were your initial impressions of the organ wine industry, specifically compared to any other place you felt familiar with? And what does it look like, specifically from the angle you're talking about right now? What does organ wine look like in 2024?
I really like what I am seeing. Now, I haven't had as much time to really get to know people, but I have to say, it's pretty awesome here. Oddly awesome. And I'm like, I'm just hoping it's not like the honeymoon phase, So you can tell me if it is or not, but
it's pretty awesome here.
It's freaking awesome here. But yes, the wine community here is incredible, and people are genuinely helpful with each other. It's welcoming, Again, coming from a different country, grown up in this, in different environment, maybe I think it made me definitely more easily adaptable to my new environment. So I would say that I'm primarily in the wine community here, and it's awesome. I really like what's happening here. I've been reading, thank you for your suggestion, The Boys Up North. And I can't help but think that they laid this foundation for this, like, helping each other. I mean, they were doing it, and I feel like it's very much here. And I feel that. Again, I hope that I don't, as I start to discover more, that there isn't like, oh, actually, stuff behind the scenes. But I really don't think there is. You know, obviously humans are never all gonna agree on things, but I don't feel any sense of competition necessarily, or some people thinking they're better than others, or there's none of that. And what I think is beautiful is that people visiting feel it. Wine drinkers who come here, they feel that togetherness, and I think that's amazing. So yeah, I was speaking with another friend who moved here from New York, I think probably less than a year ago, but much, much longer than me. And we were sitting out at Abbey Farm yesterday, just like looking out, totally complaining about how hot it was, but then just being like, we live here. This is amazing. And we just cheers to that, because it was unreal, and I actually feel at home here, which it's weird to say it that way again, maybe just my English, but there is something about here that the moment I arrived, I was just at calm, you know. It certainly helped when you're moving to know these roads, right? So it's like when I finally got off of the major road and hit 99, I was like, I know this. I know this road, you know? Because I used to drive from Newburgh to Remy Wines every day. And so that stretch felt so familiar, and it was just a really good feeling. And yeah, so I've become very protective of Oregon immediately, which I'm like, what? You just got here yesterday, you know? But yeah, I feel like I've encountered a couple of people a few weeks ago just being really surprised and offended me. They were like, you live here? Why did you move here? And I was like, leave. Why are you here? Like, they were just like, do you like it here? Yes, I genuinely love it here. And for me, in this phase in my life, there is no perfect, like there's no better place I'd rather be right now than right here. You know, I needed a place that I'm surrounded by beauty. Every day I'm like, I can't believe I live here. Still, I'm like, I cannot believe I live here, right? Being somebody who is grounded in agriculture, I'm surrounded in it. And, you know, and I needed a quiet place also to really continue with my vision and my thoughts. And it's really hard to do that in a city. So I have loved Boston. I lived there for 13 years. I've never been a city person. My first memory of hating a city was back home, Kampala. When I was young, we went to Kampala, the capital of Uganda, and I hated it. Too many people, too much noise, too much smell, like my senses get overwhelmed. It's the same feeling I get when I go to New York City. You couldn't pay me enough to go there for like 2 days. I don't like it. And Boston was just small enough that I could manage to make it work for 13 years. And my people are there. My dearest friends live in Boston. So then they make me like Boston, right? But for me, it always feels like in a city, there's so much energy, both good and bad, and you can feed off of that. And I just didn't want to be there anymore. Especially in this time when I'm really envisioning this work and wanting to do this thing that is monumental. It's really big up here. I needed a quiet place, and this is it.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously, you have you have big plans.
Big plans, yeah.
So just give me an idea of how you see it unfolding. How do you see the next few years going? What are sort of the goals you want to achieve on the way? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So I'm building this to be an international company, right? I'm not trying to be based in one place. It also just isn't me. In the next few years, my goal is to heavily be on my continent, Africa. And so I've been really paying attention to what's happening in West Africa, East Africa, and South. We're gonna just avoid North for a minute. But just culinarily, what's happening in those 3 quadrants. And, part of the 3 of the 4. Because, you know, I think Someone asked me, side note, someone asked me a couple weeks ago, why wine? It's funny, you asked it, except I answered it really differently. But I think it because who asked it? I answer that question depending on who asked it. So this was a young woman, Latina, who asked why wine. And I was speaking to her and saying that, or at least why the wine linguist. And I said, I had never thought of it this way, but I think I created this like for me and people who share a similar background or just foreignness as me. And so in the next couple of years, my goal is to engage with some really incredible entrepreneurs that I have, just the fortune of watching them do the things there, and they're really amazing. They're around my age, and I can't wait to be there and sort of do that together. They're mostly in food, and so for me, we have a younger generation that is the majority of the continent, and food is a big part of, in a way that's different than how it ever was. Food has always been a part of our culture across the continent. And I can say that of really the global South, it's a huge part of our culture, like music. But food, in a way, there's almost a bit of reclamation thing where we're really proud to be yes, we knew that we've been eating that all this time, but now I think because especially of the diaspora, looking back in, we're wanting to connect them with that and say it doesn't it's not just French food and Italian food and that's cool. We have really cool foods too. And so seeing that pride, and then also just seeing a generation that's wanting to live a life that is of no struggles. We're just tired of struggling, and they're really fighting. There's all of the different coups that's happening in West Africa have predominantly been led by millennials and Gen Zs. And then you see it in Kenya right now, it's a whole Gen Z protesting against a financial bill that was gonna get put out this year, right? So I love that fighting spirit, and they want a better life, right? We're tired of just living a life that's struggling. And so in that I see a people ready to enjoy some pleasure in life. So food and wine, right? We're ready for that. So that's who I'm paying attention to. And then obviously the global South, I chose Africa because that's my home continent. I can easily speak on that than I can, the other ones. But the goal is to find other partners in other global South countries and be able to work with them as well. One of my favorite dinners that I've been doing in Boston until I came here was with a friend who is from Thailand, and he is doing, there is no Thai restaurant in the US that's doing the authentic menus that he is, because he's not afraid to just say, listen, this is it. Yes, there's fish bile in that sauce, and you're gonna love it because it's really amazing if you don't think too hard about it, right? If you step outside of what this society is telling you is normal for what you're eating, right? So incredible menu. We've done dinners together where I do the wine pairing for that. Talk about a challenge, right? And I made it my goal to not do Riesling because I'm there are other wines, right? So it's been absolutely amazing. He's been doing dinner since I've left, at least 4 times, maybe twice a month now. And nobody wants to pair wine with them. He's done them with a restaurant, and they're not doing it with wine. They're a wine bar, restaurant, and they're not doing wine pairing because they're too scared. They're too scared that they'll mess up. It won't But I love that because I get to think about, a lot of it is guesswork for sure, but I have enough foundational knowledge and then my own experience with some flavors that could be close to that. Enough of my own experience of my friends who are all from different cultures, eating their food and logging that away. And enough of me cooking in the kitchen and playing with different flavors and doing trial runs by myself and just being whoa, that did not work. okay, but then making notes of why that didn't work, right? Enough of those collectively to have not been nervous to attempt. And I think what some people maybe, what I always say is that I am also learning. When I do these wine pairings, I do my best, right, and hope they work, especially like the first time around, I hadn't tasted the food. The menu is written in Thai. And I was like, okay, pal, can you walk me through what these flavor profiles generally might be? Well, there's gonna be some fermented, there's gonna be some spice, there's gonna be some, kaffir lime, some coconut, there's some, and I'm like, that's not a general sense of the dish. You gave me so much to work with, right? But I picked based on kind of what I imagined would work, given what I just said of my experiences, and it all freaking worked. And it was amazing. But that was still a learning experience because now I had to say, why did it work, right? And I made it, everyone at the dinner, I made it a collective learning because yes, I am the wine professional in this moment, but this isn't a one-way conversation. We're gonna talk about, okay, what I was thinking when I picked this, but then how did I do? Is it working for you, yes or no? Yes. What about it? Like, how is it making this taste in your mouth? And it was really fun. And wine consumers want to be part of the conversation and they want to feel like you're all learning. They're learning with you, you're learning with them. And so I want to bring more and more of that out. So to go back to your question that I kind of didn't skirt, but like I need to get back to, I want to do way more wine dinners. And there's a whole project around that has a name as well. But these wine dinners are meant to educate wine professionals as well as the audience whose cuisine it is. Because I want them to see themselves represented and be able to find wines that work with their cuisines. And I want us to learn and know what to offer to them when they come to us looking for wine. But in all of that, it's really amplifying all these cuisines in the world of wine that has never been amplified. So that's a massive, find chefs that are doing incredible things from different cultures and partner with them in putting together these dinners that are gonna be documented somewhat, not like we're shooting at the dinner, but I wanna sit down with them and talk about their culture and talk about, the dishes that they've chosen to put in this menu. What does it mean to them, right? What are the memories attached to them, the cultural significance to them? I think that's a human connection that we all appreciate. And so I want their story to be part of that dinner, and then we get to sit down and have this dinner, and I will have done my best to find wine pairing for these dinners. But that is definitely a focal point of my work, how I'm choosing to do this work, because that's my strength. So more of these dinners all over the place, the world, the globe. So becoming essentially a somm around the world, focusing on these cuisines to just help hopefully educate us as an industry as a whole. Small task.
I was going to say, I like that you don't aim.
I know, man. It's just not what we do. Yeah, it's either you're going to do it or don't.
Just huge goals. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Are you proudest of to this point? What's your greatest,
don't ask that.
What's your greatest accomplishment so far?
My greatest accomplishment so far? My greatest accomplishment. See, it's weird because I'm one of those people that I don't like a participation award, which is why my visions are all up there. So A for effort, so that's to say I don't often think about that question. Especially with this work, I have not gotten there yet. So I don't know, I guess as a human being, maybe I could answer that a little bit. Yeah, I would say when I step outside of my body and I look at this human, I think I'm freaking cool. It's weird to say, and I don't say that I'm not trying to be vain, but I think about like, and it only happens if I've only done this once. And I said this to myself. I was like, I would want to be friends with that. But it's like, I know I've lived the experience, and there's a lot there. And through all of that, still have courage and really, really big visions when I could have easily just, at any point, even now, choose to do something that is more lucrative or safer, or just, I don't know, the thing that my family could at least say I do. That I've always followed my heart, like the thing that I find ground me. And so I've really led like this journey. It's not that I necessarily saw the path in front of me. I do a tunnel vision. So whether that's like move to Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere, you don't know anyone, and it's because the tunnel vision at the end of it is that wood-fired oven, which is for the bistro that's like over there, right? So I really zone in on things, and then I go for it. Like I give my all to it, right? So I have led this 9 years essentially. Maybe even started in college by choosing to study hospitality. It was like, why are you not a doctor, lawyer, professor, right? Because that's the only jobs we're not allowed to have as Africans. I think other immigrants too. But because those jobs are secure, they have a status with them that means, and it brings like pride to the family. And I just went frolicking the other way. So I've led, I think, this journey. I think now I'm just really less guilty about that. But for the longest time, I followed this path half guilty. Just being like, you could stop right now and go do something that will help the family now. And instead, I could not take myself off of that path anyway. And I kept going and kept going. And I just think, this would probably be a much deeper conversation another time. But all I can say is like, I freaking lived. And to, I think, be here and still be able to have this like boundaryless vision. We did it. So yeah, I don't know if that's like an accomplishment, but I definitely think like, yeah, I can step outside of myself and be like, you're freaking cool. That's it.
It's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
That's a pretty freaking cool answer too. So, okay, I won't ask any more questions.
Thank you.
Here up. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you want to cover? Okay.
Not that I can think of. I feel like if you didn't ask it, I talked about it anyway. So
That's the goal.
Yeah. So I think we got everything. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time, sharing your story with us. Yeah. Congratulations on accomplishments so far, and best of luck on a bright future.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you off the hook.
Yeah, thank you.